My daughter said one sentence, and my world collapsed. My name is Lily Thompson. I'm 41 years old, and I learned what my daughter truly thought of me on a Thursday afternoon in March, at a kitchen table I had paid for, in a house where I'd spent 16 years making sure everyone else had enough. She was home from college for spring break. We were having coffee. I handed her a mug the way I'd handed her everything her whole life, without thinking, without conditions, without any expectation of being thanked. She took the mug, looked at her phone, and said the sentence. 7 words. She didn't look up when she said them. She said them the way you say, "Pass the sugar," or "Can you close the window?" Casual, offhand. Like the thought had been sitting in her mouth for years and it finally just fell out. And I sat there at that kitchen table and felt the floor open underneath me. I'm going to tell you everything. The sentence, what it cost me to hear it, what I found when I finally stopped performing the role I'd been cast in without ever auditioning, and what I did about it. But first, I need to tell you who I was before that Thursday, because the sentence only lands the way it landed if you understand the weight of what I'd been carrying into that kitchen every single day for 16 years. I want you to stay with me, because this isn't a story about a bad daughter. It's a story about what happens when a woman spends so long being the soft place for everyone else to land that she forgets she's allowed to be standing at all. I need to tell you something before I go any further, because I've heard stories like mine told the wrong way and I don't want to tell it that way. This is not a story about how I was betrayed. It's a story about how I participated in something for a very long time without understanding what I was participating in. There is a difference, and it matters because the version where you are simply a victim of other people's selfishness leaves you with nothing to do except be angry. And I have found, at 41, that I am not very interested in being angry. I am interested in being honest. I am interested in understanding exactly how a capable, educated, self-aware woman ends up being described by her own daughter. Casually, without malice, with perfect accuracy, as a machine that dispenses things. That is what I'm here to figure out, and I'm going to figure it out loud. With you. All the way to the end. You should know that I was not a woman who asked for help. That's not a brag. In fact, it's the opposite. I think now that my inability to ask for anything was the single most expensive habit I ever had. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where the highest compliment you could pay a woman was to call her capable. Capable meant you didn't make a fuss. Capable meant you found a way. Capable meant when your father lost his job and your mother worked nights, you packed your own lunch and helped your little brother with his homework, and you never once let the school counselor see anything other than a girl who was fine. I was fine for a very long time. I moved to Portland at 23 with a marketing degree, a used Honda, and the deep, unexamined belief that if I worked hard enough and asked for nothing, good things would eventually recognize me and show up at my door. I was 31 when I got divorced from my ex-husband, Marcus, and I want to be clear. The divorce was mutual, it was civil, and it is not the villain of this story. We wanted different things, and we had the maturity to admit it before we spent another decade making each other smaller. What came out of that marriage was my daughter, Emma, born when I was 26, a July baby, serious eyes, always watching. The kind of child who doesn't cry when she falls, just looks at you very carefully to understand what the acceptable response is. I recognized that look immediately, because I'd been wearing it since I was 8 years old. After the divorce, Emma lived primarily with me. Marcus moved to Chicago for work when she was 9, and we made it work. He flew in for holidays, we kept things respectful. Emma never had to choose sides. I made sure of that. I made sure of a lot of things. What I didn't know how to do was stop. When Emma was 12, I got a promotion that moved me into a director-level role at the marketing firm I'd been with for 6 years. Good money, real money, for the first time. I bought a house in a neighborhood with good schools. I set up a college fund. I took Emma to London for her 14th birthday because she'd mentioned once, in passing, that she wanted to see the British Museum. I also, quietly and without discussion, began sending my mother $2,000 a month. My mother, Diane Thompson, 67, lived alone in the same Ohio house I grew up in after my father passed. She had a pension, a small one, and Social Security, and the house was paid off. And none of that was the point. The point was that she called me every few weeks with something. The furnace needed servicing. The roof had a soft spot. Her car needed tires. And every time I got off the phone, I opened my banking app and I sent money because I was capable, because I could, and because somewhere in the back of my mind, the voice of the 8-year-old who packed her own lunch told me that this was just what capable people did. The 2000 became a habit, then a line item, then just a fact of my life, like the mortgage and the electricity bill. Something I didn't think about because thinking about it would have required me to look at what it added up to. And I already knew the number would be the kind that changes your face. I never once asked my mother what she spent it on. And I never once told Emma. Here's the thing about raising a daughter alone when your deepest identity is capable woman who does not need anything. You accidentally teach her that needing things is weakness. You accidentally model a kind of self-erasure so fluent and so total that it looks, from the outside, like strength. Emma grew up watching me handle everything. Flat tires, middle-of-the-night fevers, busted pipes, a flooded basement, a job that once required me to fly to New York on 4 hours' notice. She watched me handle all of it without a single exhale of complaint, without ever sitting down at the kitchen table and saying, "I'm tired. Baby, Mom is really, really tired." I thought I was showing her what a strong woman looked like. What I was actually showing her was that the woman in this house didn't have needs. That the woman in this house was a service, something that ran in the background like the heat or the Wi-Fi, dependable and silent and only noticed when it stopped working. And when Emma was 16, she started testing that. Nothing dramatic. Teenagers don't need drama. They have subtlety for this. She started leaving dishes, started answering my questions with a syllable when she had whole sentences available, started asking for things, money, rides, favors, with a directness that had no warmth in it, no please, no, "Hey, Mom, I know you're tired," but just a flat transfer of expectation, the way you'd type a request into a search bar. I told myself this was normal. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself that every mother of a 16-year-old has this exact conversation with herself at 10:30 on a Wednesday night, standing at the sink, washing a dish her daughter left because she assumed someone would get to it. I was right that it was normal. I was wrong that normal meant fine. Emma went to college at 18, out of state, a good school in Boston on a partial scholarship, and the college fund I had been building since she was 4. The house got quiet. I got promoted again. My mother called every other week with something new the furnace needed, something the roof was doing, a medical bill that had come in from a specialist she'd seen in Cleveland. And I sent the money because I was capable. And I missed my daughter with a specific complicated ache that I couldn't name, because to name it would have required me to admit that I wasn't fine. And I was always fine. Emma came home for Thanksgiving of her freshman year and something had shifted. Not badly. College had opened her up the way it does. She had opinions now, big ones, and she wanted to talk about them. And I sat across from her at that table and felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in years, because she was interesting and fierce, and I had done that, hadn't I? That was my work. Sitting across the table from me, arguing about something she'd read in a political science class. She also mentioned, just briefly, that she needed help with a course fee for spring semester. An extra lab cost, $240. She mentioned it in a tone that was not quite a question. She mentioned it the way you mention that you're low on shampoo. Not asking exactly. Just noting a condition that you expect will shortly be resolved. I paid it. Of course I paid it. I paid the spring lab fee, and I paid for the flights home for winter break, and I Venmoed her $100 twice in January, because she mentioned once that the dining hall was closed over a long weekend and she was figuring out food. I didn't track those payments separately. They didn't have their own line in my mental budget the way my mother's $2,000 a month did. They were just love. Just the water I breathed in. Sophomore year, she called me more. I thought it meant we were getting closer. I thought the subtle distance of her high school years was behind us, and we were becoming the mother and daughter I had always quietly wanted us to be. She told me about her friends. She told me about a boy she liked, then stopped liking. She told me about a professor who had it out for her. I listened to all of it. I was good at listening, always had been, because listening was something you could do from a distance without anyone seeing your face. What I didn't realize for a long time was that most of her calls came approximately 3 to 5 days before a request. Not always. Not in a way that would be obvious if you weren't running the numbers. But when I finally ran the numbers, the way I always eventually ran numbers because I was my mother's capable daughter even when I didn't want to be, the pattern was there. Warmth, then ask. Connection, then cost. And I had been interpreting the warmth as real and the ask as incidental when the ratio told a different story. I want to stop here and say something. Emma was not calculating this consciously. I need you to understand that, because this story is not about a villain. Emma had been taught by my example that the person who provides does not need to be considered, only utilized. She had learned it the same way I had learned it, from watching a woman in her life model the complete subordination of her own needs to the needs of the people around her. The difference was that I had learned it from poverty and fear, and Emma had learned it from abundance, and my never once telling her where the abundance came from. I had kept the cost of my love invisible, and so she had learned to treat it as free. Junior year. Emma came home for spring break in March. She looked good, rested, a little more confident than the last time I'd seen her at Thanksgiving. She'd gone skiing with a friend's family over winter break, which I knew because she'd texted me photos from the mountain. I had smiled at those photos and quietly noticed that I hadn't been included in the ski trip conversation until it was already decided, but I tucked that away in the drawer where I kept all the other small observations I wasn't allowed to feel. We sat down at the kitchen table with coffee on the first morning. Outside, March was doing its gray, undecided thing, the sky the color of a wet sidewalk. I had made her coffee the way she liked it, with the oat milk I had bought specifically because she'd mentioned the previous visit that she was trying oat milk. I remember being pleased with myself for remembering. She was looking at her phone. I was holding my mug with both hands. I asked about her flight. Fine. I asked about the semester. Busy. I asked about a friend she'd mentioned last time. A girl named Sophie who'd had some sort of falling out with another friend in their circle. Emma shrugged and said, "That's mostly resolved." And then there was a small pause and she set her phone face down on the table, which usually means a request is coming. I know that now. And she said it. 7 words. "You just pay for things, don't you?" Not a question. A conclusion. Said the way you'd say the sky is blue or Tuesday follows Monday. The way you'd say something that is simply a feature of the landscape, something you've observed so many times it no longer requires emphasis or inflection. A law of nature. You just pay for things, don't you? I sat with that sentence for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably 4 seconds. And I did what capable women do. I did not fall apart. I picked up my mug. I took a sip. I thought, clearly and specifically, about whether I was going to answer that sentence and what I was going to say if I did. And I heard, underneath her words, the real architecture of what she'd just handed me. She hadn't said thank you for paying for things. She hadn't said I notice how much you do and I don't always say so. She hadn't even said you're a pushover. She had said you just pay for things, and the word just was the whole story. The word just meant only. The word just meant that is the entirety of what you are. The word just meant there is a vending machine in this house and its currency is need, and I have never once thought about what it costs to fill it. I set my mug down on the table. I said, "Excuse me for 1 second." I stood up, walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. And I thought about my mother. I thought about the furnace and the tires and the $2,000 a month for 9 years. I thought about the 8-year-old who packed her own lunch and never made a fuss. I thought about all the times I had given without being asked, and all the times I had been asked and given anyway. And I thought about the kitchen where I had just learned, from my own daughter's mouth, in my own voice, the voice I had accidentally given her, what I had been telling the world I was for the last 4 decades. A vending machine. Capable. Just. I sat on the edge of that bed for 6 minutes. And then I went back to the kitchen table, because I was not the woman who fell apart. I was the woman who came back to the table. and I was finally going to say something different. I'm going to tell you about the money because the money is the only thing that is provable. Everything else, the loneliness, the exhaustion, the specific grief of loving people who treat your steadiness as ambient weather, all of that lives in a register that is hard to show anyone. But the money can be shown. I started with my mother's account. I want to be fair here. I had been sending Diane $2,000 a month since I was 32. In the 9 years since, that was $216,000. I had never once sat down and mapped what that money had done. I assumed the furnace, the tires, the medical bills she mentioned, the roof, the things she called about. That evening, after Emma went to meet a high school friend for dinner, I opened my laptop and I built a document the way I always solve hard things. Column by column, I listed every transfer I could find in my banking history. I listed every large request my mother had made over the phone in the years before I could find the records, the ones I remembered well enough to approximate. Then I called my cousin Janet, who lives 20 minutes from my mother's house and who has the quality, rare and valuable, of telling you the truth even when it costs her something to do it. I asked Janet how my mother was doing. Janet said, "Fine." I asked how the house was. Janet paused. Then Janet said, "Lily, the house is completely fine. She had it painted last year." She added a sunroom. A sunroom. I asked about the furnace. Janet said the furnace was replaced 3 years ago. The new one, the good kind. High efficiency. I asked about the car. Janet said her mother had a 2-year-old Subaru she'd bought outright, which Janet had thought came from some savings Diane had been sitting on. I thanked Janet and got off the phone. Then I went back to the document and I did the calculation I had been too capable to do for 9 years. $2,000 a month for 108 months. $216,000. My mother's documented needs, the verifiable ones, the things that appeared in the records, came to somewhere around 30,000, maybe 35 if I was generous. That left approximately $180,000 unaccounted for. A sunroom. A 2-year-old Subaru bought outright. A woman who had been telling her book club, my cousin Janet had mentioned once in passing, that she managed well on what she had. Those were the exact words. Managed well on what she had. I thought about that sentence now, and I heard in it the same architecture as Emma's sentence from that morning. A woman describing a situation without ever once naming the person who made it possible. I wasn't angry yet. That's the thing about being the capable one. The anger doesn't come first. First comes something colder, something that feels almost like math. The flat, factual recognition that you have been spending yourself on a story that was never true, that the story was curated specifically to keep you spending. Then I opened Emma's college accounts, because I was in it now, and when I'm in it, I finish. Emma's college fund, which I had built from her birth, had covered most of tuition. What remained was what I had been supplementing each semester. The extras, the fees, the flights, the Venmos in January for food over long weekends. I added those up too. And then I sat very still for a long time, looking at the total of all the money I had been sending quietly, invisibly, without names or notices, to the 2 people who were most supposed to see me. And I thought about the word just. I didn't blow anything up that week. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a person who detonates, and I don't believe that detonating is usually the most precise instrument. I waited. I watched. I made coffee in the morning, and I drove Emma to see a friend, and I said, "Have fun, and let me know when you're heading back," and I let the week pass like a river passing, water over stone. But something had changed in me at a cellular level, the way water changes rock, invisibly and permanently. On the second to last night of spring break, Emma and I were watching television on the couch when she mentioned, very casually, that she'd been looking at apartments near campus for senior year. Off-campus housing, the next step. And she'd found a really nice place, 2 bedrooms, she'd split it with Sophie. The lease was $2,200 a month, $1,100 each. She said it in a tone of light conversation, the tone you use when you're describing something that's already decided, that just needs the logistics confirmed. I turned my head and looked at her. I said, "That's a big expense." She said, I know, but the dorms are really small and it's my senior year. I said, how are you thinking about covering it? She looked at me, and I watched the exact moment of confusion cross her face. Real confusion, not performed. Because she genuinely had not thought about the question. The question had never been a real question before. The question had always been a formality, a brief pause in the sequence before the outcome she expected arrived. She said, I figured you'd help. I said, I'm going to need to think about that. And I watched her face do something I had never seen it do in 21 years of watching her face. She looked just for a second like she didn't know which way was up. I didn't say it to punish her. I want to be very clear about that. I said it because it was true, and also because somewhere in the part of me that had sat on the edge of that bed 4 days earlier and done the first honest accounting of my life, I had understood that the kindest thing I had ever not done for my daughter was this. I had never let her learn that things cost something. Not just money. Things. Attention costs something. Consistency costs something. Being there at 7 in the morning with the oat milk you remembered, on a day when your own body is tired and your own life has weight in it, that costs something. And when the person who provides those things never names the cost, never shows the invoice, never says I give this and it means this much to me, the recipient learns, by total and reasonable logic, that there is no cost. That giving is just what that person does, that it is their nature, like a river's nature to run downhill, not a choice that gets made fresh every morning. Emma had learned a true thing about me. I did just pay for things. I just hadn't ever made her look at what paying for things had looked like, from the inside. The conversation that changed us happened on her last night. I cooked dinner, actually cooked, the good pasta she'd liked since she was small, and I poured 2 glasses of wine and I sat down at the kitchen table and I told her. Not everything at once. I didn't hand her a spreadsheet. I didn't read her a number, not that night. I told her about the 8-year-old who packed her own lunch. I told her about Ohio and the cold house and the particular education you receive when you grow up being told that needing things is something to be ashamed of. I told her about her grandmother, about the $2,000 a month, about the sunroom I'd never been invited to see. I told her that I had loved providing for her, that it was one of the truest things I had ever done and I did not want to undo it, but that I had made a mistake, a significant one. Not in giving, but in hiding the giving, in making my love look like a utility, in teaching her, without meaning to, that I was a service rather than a person. She listened the way she listens, very still, very watchful, those serious eyes she'd had since birth. And then I told her what she'd said at this table 4 days ago. You just pay for things, don't you? I told her it had knocked me sideways. Not because it was cruel. She hadn't meant it to be cruel, and I knew that. But because it was accurate. And because the reason it was accurate was not her fault. The reason it was accurate was that I had built a role for myself in this family and in this life, and I had performed that role so completely that the person inside it had become invisible, even to my own daughter, even for a long time to me. Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she said something. She said it quietly, carefully, the way she says things she's been sitting with for a while before letting them out. She said, I think I didn't know there was a person. I just thought that was you. Does that make sense? And I thought, yes. Yes. That makes complete sense, and it is the most honest and painful and useful thing you have ever said to me. I said, that's exactly what I showed you, and I'm showing you something different now. What happened with my mother took longer and was harder, the way things with parents always are, because the architecture goes deeper and the roles are older, and the part of you that is still 8 years old with a lunchbox has opinions about what is permissible. I reduced the transfer. Not to 0, not immediately. I dropped it from 2,000 to 500, and I wrote my mother a letter. Not a text. A letter. Paper. Explaining that I had done some accounting and that I wanted to talk with her about what she needed versus what she had, and whether the full amount was going where I had understood it to go. My mother called me within 48 hours. Her voice was warm. The performance warm voice. The one that means she wants something. She asked if everything was okay. I said yes. Fine. Just reorganizing some finances. She asked if the transfer was a bank issue. I said no. And there was a pause. A very specific pause that I recognized because I had heard it before. It was the pause she used when the warm voice wasn't working and she was shifting registers to the next tool. She said, "Lily, I don't know what I've done to deserve this. After everything. After your father. I'm just trying to get by." And I heard in that sentence the whole vocabulary of a lifetime. After everything. Just trying. I am a person who is suffering, and you are the person responsible for my suffering not increasing. I said, "Mom, tell me what the money goes to. Be specific." Another pause. She named the utility bills, the grocery budget, the co-pays for her doctor. I said, "What about the sunroom?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. I said, "I'm not trying to fight. I'm trying to understand. $500 a month is still in the budget if it goes where you said it went. But I need to know what I'm paying for. I should have asked a long time ago, and that's on me. I'm asking now." We didn't resolve it in that call. These things don't resolve in a call. But something shifted, the same way something had shifted with Emma at the kitchen table. The relationship had been operating on the assumption that my visibility didn't matter, and I had just made myself visible. It was uncomfortable for both of us. That discomfort was exactly correct. I want to tell you about the month after Emma went back to Boston, because it's the part of this story I needed someone to tell me, and no one ever did. It was quiet. It was strange. I had spent so long being capable and fine and the woman who handled everything that I did not know what I was when no one was actively needing something from me. I came home from work to a house where the coffee was mine, and the dishes were mine, and nothing needed to be resolved or managed or fixed. And I sat at that kitchen table, the kitchen table that had heard so many things, and I thought, who am I when I'm not being useful? I genuinely didn't know. I had a therapist I saw every few weeks, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Carol who had been waiting, I suspect, for exactly this moment in our sessions. When I told her about Emma's sentence, she did something I didn't expect. She smiled, not unkindly. She smiled the way you smile when something you've been watching slowly develop finally comes clear. She said, "That sentence cracked something open. How does it feel on the other side?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "Like I've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and I just noticed my arms are tired." She said, "What do you want to do with the weight?" And I thought about the 8-year-old. I thought about capable. I thought about the word just. I thought about my mother's sunroom and my daughter's face in the moment of genuine confusion when I told her I needed to think about the apartment. I said, "I want to put some of it down. And I want to let the people I love know it was there." She said, "What's stopping you?" And I thought about that question for a long time before I answered it. Because the real answer was embarrassing, the way honest answers usually are. The real answer was that I had been so identified with the role of capable, self-sufficient, handling everything woman that I had genuinely confused that role with my personality. I thought that was who I was. I thought if I put the weight down, there would be nothing left. Just an empty woman at a kitchen table, nothing to give, nothing to carry, no reason for anyone to need her. In a life where no one needed you felt, from the inside of that fear, like a life where no one loved you. Dr. Carol said something I have been thinking about ever since. She said, "You built a very secure attachment strategy. Being needed means being kept. The problem is that it also means never being seen. You can't be needed and known at the same time. They cancel each other out." I asked her what that meant exactly, in practice. She said, "It means that every time you solved a problem before someone noticed it existed, you were making a trade. You were buying safety. They won't leave me, they need me. And you were paying for it with your visibility." The bill just finally came due. The bill came due at a kitchen table on a Thursday morning in March in 7 words. You just pay for things, don't you? That's where it always comes due. Not in a dramatic fight, not in a blow-up or a crisis. In a sentence that lands so softly, so matter-of-factly, that you almost miss it. Just a law of nature. Casually stated, the sky is blue. Tuesday follows Monday. I'm grateful it came due when it did. I'm grateful it came from Emma, and not from someone who meant it cruelly. I'm grateful I was 41 and not 61. I'm grateful for the 6 minutes on the edge of that bed and the spreadsheet I made that evening, and Janet's voice on the phone telling me, without knowing she was doing it, that there was a sunroom where no one had invited me. I am grateful that I am the kind of woman who comes back to the table. Here's where we are now. Not the tidy ending, the real one. Emma and I talk differently now. It happened gradually, over several months. Not a dramatic single conversation, but a slow recalibration that I think of as learning a new language with someone you've spoken to for your whole life. She came home for the summer between junior and senior year, and on the second day, she asked if I was tired out of nowhere while I was making dinner. I had a headache that day. A real one, the kind that parks behind your left eye and stays. And I said, actually, yeah, a little. And she said, want me to finish that? Gesturing at the pot. It was a small thing, 14 words total. But it was the first time in 21 years that my daughter had looked at me and seen something that might need to be carried, rather than something that did the carrying. I let her finish the pasta. I sat down at the table and I let myself be the one who sat down. That is still the realest thing that has happened to me since March. The apartment for senior year. She covered half with a campus job she picked up in the spring, and the other half I helped with. And this time I told her clearly what I was contributing and why, and what I expected of her in terms of basic financial awareness. Tracking her spending, knowing her budget, understanding that the help was help and not a utility. She listened. She didn't love all of it, but she listened, and she said, okay. And when she said it, I believed her. My mother and I are in something complicated and ongoing. The $500 transfer continues because she does have real costs and she's 67 and alone, and I'm not interested in punishing her, only in being honest with myself about what I'm giving and why. The conversations have been hard. She has a remarkable capacity to rewrite history in real time, to describe the last 9 years in a way that leaves out the sunroom and the Subaru and the book club line about managing on what she had. I've stopped needing her version to match mine. I know what the bank records say. The numbers don't have favorites and they don't lie to your face, which is more than I can say for some people, which is something I've always known and am only now allowing myself to use. What I keep coming back to is this. Emma said you just pay for things, don't you? And she meant it as an observation, a feature of the landscape. And she was right. I did just pay for things. I paid with money, and I paid with time, and I paid with the particular currency of the capable woman, which is the currency of never letting anyone see you flinch. But just also means only, and that's the part she handed me as a gift, even though she didn't know it was a gift. She told me that she had only ever seen the function. She had never been shown the person. The person had been there the whole time, at the kitchen table, hands around a mug, making oat milk coffee for the people she loved, absolutely certain that being needed was the same as being seen. It is not the same. They are not the same. And here is the part I sat with for a long time, in the weeks and months after that March morning, that I want to give you directly, because it took me years to find it on my own. The people who love you the way Emma loved me, imperfectly, transactionally, without fully seeing you. They are not, most of them, bad people. They are people who were taught a curriculum by the way you presented yourself to them. Every time I handled something without showing the weight of it. Every time I gave without naming the giving. Every time I said I'm fine when I wasn't. Every time I stayed at the sink until the dishes were done instead of leaving some for someone else. Every time I took the middle seat on the airplane, chose the worst parking spot, ate the last of the breakfast that had gone cold. Every single one of those times I was teaching a lesson. The lesson was, this person does not have needs. The lesson was, this person's job is to make things easier for you. The lesson was, you do not need to see her. She doesn't require it. I taught that lesson 10,000 times. And then I sat at a kitchen table and was surprised by the exam. That's the thing about becoming visible. It requires you to accept your own authorship. Not all of it. Emma was responsible for her own words. My mother was responsible for her own choices. But I was responsible for the conditions. I had engineered a world where people didn't know how to see me because I had never once stood still long enough to be looked at properly. Standing still was the hardest thing I ever did. Harder than packing my own lunch at 8. Harder than working my way into a marketing degree on financial aid. Harder than raising a daughter alone in a city where I had 3 friends and no family, and a job that wanted my whole self, and a mother who needed her furnace serviced every other autumn. Standing still required me to admit that I was tired. And admitting I was tired required me to accept that I had been tired for a very long time. That the tiredness wasn't weakness or ingratitude or a failure of the capable woman I had constructed so carefully over 4 decades. It was just the honest weight of a life that had been carrying more than one person's share. I put the weight down. Not all at once. Not perfectly. I still pick it back up sometimes in the old reflexive way, before I notice what I'm doing and set it back down again. But I know it now. I can feel it in my hands. And knowing what you're carrying is not the same as not carrying it. But it is, I have found, the first step toward choosing. In a way I did not know it at 8 or 26 or 32 or 39. And the way I know it is because my daughter said 7 words without looking up from her phone, and the floor opened, and I went through it. And on the other side was a woman I had not met before. Her name is also Lily Thompson. She asks for things now. Not always, not perfectly, not without the old reflex rising in her throat the way a familiar song rises when you hear the first few notes. But she asks. She says I'm tired when she's tired. She says that cost me something when it did. She sits at the kitchen table and lets the coffee get cold because she is thinking, not managing, just thinking. And she does not feel guilty about the silence. She is learning, slowly, that you cannot be truly loved if you have made yourself invisible. That the people who praise you for being the strong one are usually just naming the person they have quietly decided they will never have to carry. That being needed and being seen are 2 entirely different rooms, and only one of them has a window. She is trying to live in the one with the window. If you are the person in your house who handles everything, who sends the money quietly, who remembers the oat milk, who packs the lunchbox for everyone including yourself, I want you to hear this. From me, from that kitchen table in March, from the 7 words that cracked the floor open. You are not a utility. The cost of what you give is real, even when you hide it. Especially when you hide it. And hiding it is not generosity. Hiding it is something older and more frightened than generosity. And you learned it somewhere, at someone's knee, from someone who also believed that needing things was something to be ashamed of. You are allowed to show the invoice. You are allowed to say, this is what it cost me, and I gave it anyway, because I love you. You are allowed to let the people you love see that the water has a source, that someone fills it, that the someone is you. You are allowed to be the person at the table, not just the person who set the table. You are allowed to sit down. That is my story. A kitchen table, 7 words, and 16 years of a woman who forgot she was allowed to be a person. If something here reminded you to look at a transfer you haven't examined, or a dynamic you haven't named, or a relationship where the word just has been quietly doing damage, take that as your sign. Look at it today. The numbers are there. The person is there. She has always been there. She's just been waiting for you to let her sit down.